Good afternoon, Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, the diaspora, those logged in on the World Wide Web, Facebook, on YouTube, and local media. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Nadia Frank John, and I am pleased to be your host this evening. You are tuned in to the virtual public consultations for the Scarborough Urban Redevelopment, hosted by the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development. Tonight, the Tourism and Environmental Stakeholders sections are with us tonight to contribute to the process of redefining what a new Scarborough should look like and what values or features it should offer to the industries. So overall, this platform will provide you, the public, with an opportunity to contribute or to constructively critique the design. Be mindful that the design is not set in stone, hence the consultations. We converse today, and as we converse, let's be oriented towards finding solutions and offering best ideas to advance the goals of redeveloping Scarborough. This evening, we have three presenters. Presenting today are Joshua Stewart, Lead Architect, Salisha Duke, Project Manager with the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, and Dr. Alvin Thompson, Urban Planner, joining us via Zoom. Also on the panel is Dr. Ellis Boris, Specialist Engineer and Technical Advisor in the division. This will be followed by an open forum segment. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our first presenter, the Lead Architect, Joshua Stewart. Joshua Stewart is a RIBA Chartered Architect and the Principal of Geometrics Limited. He studied at London South Bank University, where he obtained a Master's in Architecture and was awarded the Departmental Final Year Prize for Undergraduate Architecture at the London South Bank University. He is highly motivated and creative with over 20 years experience in the built environment. Stewart is knowledgeable in international building codes and systems with a wealth of experience as a lead architect and design coordinator for small and major design projects. Some projects he has worked on include Cabildo Chambers and Red House, FCB Scarborough Branch, Brian Lara Stadium, and Luxury Villa. Mr. Stewart, we welcome you.
Thank you, Ms. Frank. Good afternoon to my fellow panelists and all the Tobagonians who are tuned in today for this consultation. Based on the last consultation we had, the feedback I got even from foreign consultants was that the population of Tobago, they are very informed and highly intelligent. So once we come together and combine our knowledge and experience and expertise, we can definitely produce a fantastic city of Scarborough for the people of Tobago. In our last presentation, most of the emphasis was placed on the port area. But there are other areas within Scarborough to be developed. So the historical center, which is Uptown Scarborough, is one of the key areas to be developed, which is one of the main tourist attractions for Scarborough. Also, we have the Civic Center, which is near Tiantec, which will house all the government agencies. Also, we have a housing development on the northern side of Claude Noel Highway, which is opposite the Light and Life Secondary School. There's also development for the infrastructure and road networks in the Mount Mary area, Sangsastil area, and Smithfield area. And all these networks will be interconnected into the new port development. So these different elements were segmented in phases or urban areas, which can be developed while the research is being done, the coastal studies and the market studies for the port development. So the housing and urban park area, which is an integral part of our proposal, which is near Light and Life area and goes all the way down to the port area, will be one of the key elements that can be implemented at the initial stage of this proposal, of this development. Then we have the area where Tiantec is currently located. As mentioned previously, Tiantec will be relocated to Cove, and that entire block will be developed into a civic center. And this goes all the way back to the highway, the Claude Noel Highway. So there will be beautification done in that area, connecting the highway all the way back to where Tiantec is, which will now be the civic center. And the other phase will be Uptown Scarborough, where the legislature is currently located. That building will be extended, and there will be a museum and a library incorporated into that area. So where the fishing area is currently located, we are proposing to have some accommodation between Custom Street and Castry Street. So there will be, this accommodation will help to facilitate both international and local visitors to the area. We will also have special transportation system for the disabled. So this system will link Custom Street to Castry Street, which will help the disabled to access Uptown Scarborough and the historical centers. Also on the hillside between Custom Street and Castry Street, we can do some low-cost accommodation. For example, domestic travelers who might be stranded on the port and need accommodation overnight, they can reside here, and also visiting tourists can also reside here. So along the port area, there will be landscape. That area will be landscaped with pedestrianized areas as well to accommodate the influx of tourists. And this is an example of the pedestrianized area, and there will also be bike areas as well. The existing port terminal will be repurposed into a festival market. So this is an example of how the festival market can be utilized, where you have a lot of cultural activities and art and crafts will be exhibited to the visitors. And there will be a new terminal built for the domestic travelers. So this is an example of how the transport hub will be done, and that's in the reclaimed area of the new port. Also the streets along Milford Road. There will be wide sidewalks to accommodate pedestrian traffic. Also there will be bike lanes as well. So one can ride from uptown Scarborough all the way down to the Lambo area or the abattoir. As we all know, Scarborough currently is not conducive for pedestrian traffic. Hence the reason that serious consideration was taken in our design to implement wide sidewalks. Also, this is an example of the waterfront leisure area. Another example of the waterfront park area, which will be lined with trees to provide solar shading for the users. Also, we are proposing to have a cable car from the housing area. Let me go back to the housing plan. Yes, so we are proposing to have a cable car from the housing area, which is north of the Claude Noble Highway. The cable car will pass through the new urban park, which is near Light and Life, and go all the way down to the new reclaimed land port area, downtown Scarborough. And this will give the users a bird's eye view of Scarborough. We are also proposing to have a cable car from the fort all the way down to Lower Scarborough. So this is an example of the urban park that we are planning to propose, which is an integral part of the Scarborough Development Plan. And these are some other examples of the park area. So I'm really looking forward to more feedback from the general public. That's the main purpose of the public consultation. And once we take on board all your comments and your concerns, we go back to the drawing board, modify the design, and as we develop the design, we'll have constant consultation with the public to get their feedback as we move forward. So this is not a one-man show. We have a lot of intelligent and very skilled and talented Tobagonians who will be part of this process, and I look forward to working with you guys. Thank you.
Joshua, thank you for that enlightening presentation. I think that some of the points you discussed were really, really interesting and things that we can look forward to. The housing improvements in the road network. You know, I have a particular interest in road networks and an improvement. So I like those those things, and civic centers and urban parks, all great ideas that we look forward to seeing, you know, developed more fully and materialized. And I know that our listeners and our viewers are going to give some really nice input as to what they expect to see and what they expect to experience once these things are developed in our city center. As we move along, and to, you know, just back up what Joshua has said, I know that our next presenter will match perfectly, because she will go more in depth into explaining some things like the phasing of how things will happen. Because sometimes when we have plans like these discussed, and we think that we wake up tomorrow morning and everything happens. And so she will shed some light on, you know, project management and the phases and the things that need to happen, and go a bit more into detail as to how the project will potentially roll itself out. And we have Miss Duke. Ms. Duke is a project coordinator at the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development. She has served in the Tobago House of Assembly for 13 years, 11 of which she has been in a capacity of a project manager. She has managed projects at the Office of the Chief Secretary, and with the latest being the expansion of the Calder Hall Administrative Complex and the PRDI refurbishment. She is the holder of a MSc in Project Management and Evaluation from the University of the West Indies, and a Bachelor's of Business Administration with a concentration in Finance and Human Resources Management from the University of New Brunswick. She also holds a Technician's Diploma from the construction from City and Guild. Miss Duke, we welcome you.
Good afternoon to you, the stakeholders and the listening public. Good afternoon. Just a recap of what I would have gone through last week. Scarborough is our capital and is currently dubbed the administrative and commercial center of Tobago. It has an interesting history and is surrounded by various historical elements. An examination of Scarborough in its present condition will highlight years of neglect and urban decay. There exists a fading business and commercial center, many aging, poorly maintained and dilapidated infrastructure, utility lines hanging on wooden poles that are unsightly, which contributes to a poor urban aesthetic and unsafe environment. Scarborough has a transportation network that is inadequate to properly cater to its current needs and any future development. Our capital is a gateway to our island, and it is viewed as a less than appealing place for tourist destination. As mentioned last week, at the beginning of the year, the Executive Council signaled its commitment for the redevelopment and revitalization of Scarborough by making it one of its priority projects. This is an effort to enhance the image of our city into 21st century and to improve its environment. Further, it is understood that our capital must serve as an engine for growth and should enable and encourage activities to flourish, economic activities to flourish, Stakeholders. Our lead architect would have presented a conceptual master plan showcasing possibilities of how our capital can develop. This conceptual plan has focused on some elements such as tourism, commercial development, transportation network infrastructures, residential and recreational developments as solution to help eradicate some persistent issues troubling Scarborough. Stakeholders, walk with me as I engage your imagination. Let us envision in our minds the endless possibilities of our city. Imagine Scarborough with a reorganized and well-developed port that can afford us the opportunity to forge connection internationally through trade. Our Executive Council made it known their intention to build out various sectors in the Tobago space so that our island can actively participate in the exportation of Tobago products. This commercial aspect of the port will also allow us to do direct importation of goods, which would result in the reduction of cost of production on our island and also helped to drive the cost of living down. Stakeholders, imagine our port now being able to accommodate at least 2 cruise ship berthing along with our ferries and other sea vessels. This development would create a myriad of opportunities for commercial activities within our capital. Now, we felt Scarborough must never be seen as a mere entry or transit point to other parts of our beautiful island, but also serve as an attraction and destination in its own right. Therefore, this conceptual master plan for the redevelopment of Scarborough was done with the idea of tourism in mind. It is widely known that city tourism encourages economic growth for a country. Stakeholders, we want our capital to further tell a story about us, and thus it is critically important to include as part of the port design a museum showcasing some of our history with artifacts retrieved from the bottom of our ocean. As our lead architect would have presented, and he would have expounded on how he would build out the port to promote city tourism. Stakeholders, stay with me. As mentioned before, our capital has been experiencing a lot of transportation network issues, and the dysfunctional public transportation system is one. Therefore, we want you to imagine a concept of a Scarborough that has a transportation hub at the proposed garden site with a skywalk connection to a multiple level car park across by where old NIB used to be. The intent of this transportation hub is envisioned to accommodate all forms of public transportation such as buses, maxi taxis and taxis, etc. Offices, shops and restaurants will also form part of the hub, and this would encourage commerce in town. Imagine with me, stakeholders, the convenience of accessing a transportation to go different parts of the island at a common location. This hub would be able to provide that. It will improve the accessibility of transportation by providing convenient transfers between different transportation modes. We want to also promote the notion of parking and ride, hence the close proximity of parkade to the transportation hub. Stakeholders, we want to once and for all deal with the unsightly utility lines in Scarborough and improve our aesthetics. Therefore, we are proposing the relocation of our lines from various utility companies underground. Visualize the lines from Carrington Street straight down to Milford Road, Wilson Road, Gardenside Street, Main Street, Castries Street. All them lines alone, being underground, would give our capital a major facelift. Now, stakeholders, this is merely a concept we are proposing to you, and this is essentially a participatory process. We want to ensure that your vision are aligned with our vision as we work to make this city one of the greatest cities in the region and by extension, the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duke. I was tempted to go down to close my eyes and envision a Scarborough like you described, one that is user-friendly, that one that encourages persons to enjoy our city center, and the concept of being involved in such a plan, of being involved in that development is one that is quite interesting to me. Our next speaker will speak to some of our environmental discussions and challenges, and just enlighten us on some of the things that we need to take into consideration as we continue to envision a new Scarborough, a redeveloped Scarborough. Dr. Alvin Thompson grew up in Delaford. His interest in urban planning focuses primarily on housing and human settlement. More recently, his research has focused on governance and governance responses to the impact of sea level on coastal cities. Dr. Thompson is currently a postdoctoral fellow in the Faculty of Applied Science, the Center for Interactive Research and Sustainability at the University of the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. In his current work, he uses social ecological systems thinking as an entry point to study how global and local drivers of climatic and environmental change create multiple impacts on coastal systems and littoral communities. Relatedly, his work draws on governance, and his study shows how legislative and policy arrangements can enable or constrain adaptation to the impacts of climate change. Dr. Thompson, welcome to our consultation this afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for having me. Let me start by saying I am indeed overwhelmed to be involved in this process. The panelists have spoken very eloquently about the fact that all of us who grew up in Tobago would like to see Scarborough as a thriving town, a vibrant town, but many of us have lived for a long time and haven't seen that. Before I get into the meat of my presentation, I want to acknowledge the Secretary responsibility for Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, Secretary James. I want to acknowledge my fellow panelists. And I also want to acknowledge the many Tobagonians who have taken their time to be a part of these evening proceedings. Just allow me to share my screen for a bit. So my presentation this evening is entitled Reimagining the Capital of Paradise, Tobago Beyond Ordinary, the best little island on the planet, clean, green, safe and serene. This is really a confusion of some of the ideas that have been put forward recently by first, the idea of Capital of Paradise was first advanced in the CEDP, the Comprehensive Economic Development Plan for Tobago. And the idea of clean, green, safe, and serene was also advanced in that plan. And more recently, the Division of Tourism has adopted the tagline Tobago Beyond Ordinary, untouched, unspoiled. And our Chief Secretary, the Honorable Fadi Augustine, has a liking for this idea of the best little island on the planet. I think the best little island and the Capital of Paradise conflict really nicely. All right, but clean, green, and serene is where I want to take my presentation. So if you notice, I have changed around the clean, green, safe, and serene to green, clean, safe, and serene, because I think the idea of green encapsulates really nicely all those other areas. So I have two burdens this evening in terms of my presentation. First, I wanted to kind of show how we could take a concept like green, clean, safe, and serene, and mainstream it in a development approach to city planning. And then later on in my presentation, although I'm not focusing a lot on this, I want to kind of demonstrate what the benefits of that kind of strategy would be for tourism. So a green strategy essentially focuses on these broad areas, on building smarter, designing smarter, living smarter, but fundamentally, a green strategy really focuses on sustainable development, which is a synonym for green. So how do we use each element of this idea of green, clean, safe, and serene and mainstream it into this approach that we want to build out for the city of Scarborough? So clean has been used synonymously with this idea of carbon neutrality or net zero. Right? So Joshua and the other young lady would have put quite eloquently this idea of having transportation systems in Scarborough. They also spoke to the issue of energy. All right. So let's go back. I'm going forward. What would a clean energy or alternative energy focus look like for the city? So I would say that all the buildings that Joshua spoke about would be constructed using a LEED certification. So the Scarborough Civic Center, the Scarborough Museum, the domestic port terminal, the port terminal complex, and the multi-story car park, all those buildings, all right, would be constructed according to LEED certification. What about sustainable transportation systems? The focus here would be on replacing public vehicles with EVs and providing on-street EV parking stations. All right, so imagine, if you will, along Carrington Street or on Milford Road, all right, having on-street parking with EV charging station along there, and you could park, perhaps go to a restaurant while your vehicle is parking. That's a kind of sustainable system that I am seeing in my mind. And we can link this very nicely to a tourism offering if we introduce at the same time things like e-scooters, electric flex cars, electric tour buses for those tours, perhaps to the Botanic Garden, up at the fort, along that stretch going back to Bacalet, all right, replacing a whole fleet of vehicles now, over time, of course, with EVs. What about safe? Okay, so the focus in this sub-strategy would be on upgrading existing safety standards. So the target here would be on personal safety, and we'll focus on OSH standards, road safety, having autonomous speed guns. You know now that there are a lot of accidents taking place in Tobago. So imagine driving along the Cloudwell Highway, and as you drive, there are these autonomous guns telling you how fast you're going, all right, and warning you to slow down as you go. All right, that's the idea. Having red light cameras, maybe at that major intersection on Glen Road. So if you're coming down the highway driving too fast, you go through that intersection, breaking a red light, a camera would pick up your license plate information, and we send you a bill by mail. All right. Food standards would be strict, adhering to HACCP standards, and drinking and bathing water, especially bathing water, would fall within that gambit of blue flag certification. Just recently, on the northeast end of Tobago, I think it's in Dallaford, we had Dallaford being certified as blue flag. We have a challenge on the southwest side, but certainly we could work on having those beaches meet or qualify for blue flag qualification. What about the serene approach? So earlier, Joshua also spoke to some of the connectivity throughout the city. So the focus here would be on increasing the quality of outdoor leisure time. So tourists coming off a cruise ship, for example, would be able to rent a bike, an e-bike, or a conventional bike. Having an e-bike is especially useful because e-bikes would run on electricity if you're going uphill, but if you're on the flat, then you can cycle. So imagine coming off a cruise ship at the port and then renting an e-bike, riding along a street in Scarborough, but then deciding to go up to the fort, and then you could switch from having a manual pedal to an e-bike to go up the fort. Our green space networks, Joshua earlier in this presentation, identified quite a number of areas that we intend to make green. I see this as part of a larger green space network, all right, connecting areas in up the fort with Shore Park, connecting the central business district, that core in and around the port, with those outlying villages that forms part of that greater Scarborough region, all right, through a corridor or network of green spaces. This is a good one. Potting greens in urban parks. Imagine coming off a cruise ship and deciding to go for a few rounds of golf. The Botanic Gardens is a really nice place for that. So you could get off your ship, go to the Botanic Gardens, and have a nice pot for a fee, of course, maybe 50 US for half an hour potting green. All right. Joshua also spoke of the urban park. I think somewhere. Yeah. Joshua also spoke of that urban park somewhere in the vicinity of Light and Life. All right. So all these will form part of that larger green space network. Outdoor dining along some of those major streets, Milford Road, for example. Once you have the width on Milford Road, you could then have outdoor dining on larger sidewalks. So restaurants along that could set up park benches or these ideal sitting areas, and tourists can sit outside instead of inside a restaurant and dine in the evening sunlight, for example. You also have organized street vending, organized and outdoor shopping. So if you have a shop, a storefront along Milford or any of those major streets, you'll be allowed to, instead of only displaying your stuff in store, to display your stuff outside as well. Street furniture. These shots I have here are actually part of a previous plan by Geneva. So the one to the top here is actually looking up Burnett Hill. All right, so the first one is looking up Burnett Hill with trees and enhanced landscape. This one, sorry, I'll go back previous. So the one to the left is standing at the Scarborough port looking up Glen Road, back to the market. And the other one to the right is standing at the port looking up east towards Carrington Street. So these are landscape architect renderings for the Scarborough area by Geneva. So, and finally, the big one. This is the one that has been creating all the stir, the integrated port facility. So my understanding is that the Scarborough port will be transformed into this integrated port facility, where you have facilities for berthing, you have a marina also, and you also have facilities for a cargo port. It doesn't really fit this model. The last two photographs are photographs from the US Virgin Islands. And this is, when I look at these, they almost look like Scarborough. All right, so the upper part of that photograph, you could see the facility for a small port, a container facility. In the middle, there is the marina for yachts and so on. And then to the end, you see about 2 cruise ships berthed there. So this is how I see the development on the Scarborough port itself emerging as this integrated port facility. Well, finally, I wouldn't comment too much on these issues. I just wanted to highlight the contribution. What I have done here is I have drawn some information from a study conducted in 2008 by the World Research Institute to show that at that time, all right, Tobago's GDP was about 286 million US dollars, which was just shy of 2 billion TT dollars. So this is 2006, all right? And in terms of coral reef tourism, this is coral reef tourism only. This does not include other types of tourism, all right? The estimate was that coral reef tourism contributed between 101 to 130 million US dollars. And in the reference section of my presentation, if you're interested in reading about this, that study, the reference to that study is there. And finally, this is just some information I got just recently off the World Tourism Council's website. This is updated information, but unfortunately, this information has not been disaggregated for Tobago. So it really gives you a sense of how tourism has been doing during the COVID period, 2019, 2020. Again, I'm not a tourism expert, so I'm not dwelling on these issues. I've merely provided them for context to demonstrate that tourism would have a significant impact and has had a significant impact on Tobago's economy. And certainly a development as is being envisaged here for Scarborough would have a similar impact. And finally, again, this is just some recent arrival figures, 2019, 2020, for both inbound and outbound arrivals and departure from Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Dr. Thompson, like the other panelists, your plan was really targeted to our audience this evening, speaking about, you know, the impacts of what the plans for redeveloped Scarborough could mean for our tourism industry. But I don't want the persons that are on this evening that are not in the tourism or environmental industries, the local residents, to feel like, oh, well, we're just redeveloping Scarborough for tourism. No, this plan is for you, it's for us. And the consultations allows all of us to be a part, to have an intimate part of the process. It allows us to use plans that were developed in the past, like Geneva, and other plans that were developed, and take parts and concepts from them that are applicable in today's environment, are applicable with the plans that this THA would like to develop, and make them developed for a city of Scarborough that all of us, local residents and tourist residents, can enjoy. And it is indeed a wonderful time to be alive, and even if not to enjoy the redeveloped Scarborough yourself, think about the investment your contribution to this plan would make for your future generations. I feel happy on the inside knowing that my children would be able to enjoy a Scarborough like this. And if I have nothing else to leave behind for them, I leave behind an investment of a redeveloped Scarborough. It's indeed a happy time for us to think of a redeveloped Scarborough, a redeveloped Tobago, and to enjoy those things. We're going to move swiftly along this afternoon and go straight into our interactive session with you. And that means that I am going to share with you how you can get in contact with us. So those of you that are on Zoom, you are allowed one question per person. And all you have to do is raise your virtual hand on Zoom and we will acknowledge you, take your questions. We're encouraging you from now. When we take your questions, we ask you to be quick, to the point as much as possible, because we want to entertain as many questions as possible. And we will have our panelists answer your questions, again, to the best of their abilities at this point in the development process. Our questions, persons that are viewing on Facebook, persons that are viewing via YouTube, you can post your questions there. We have a competent team. They will extract your questions from the comment box and they will send it on, and we'll have your questions answered as well. And if you wish to have the most intimate connection with us this afternoon, you can call in. We encourage you to call in. You can call us directly at 73 words. That is 739-6757, and that is powered in part by B Mobile. Life is on. So we're open for questions now. Let me have your first question. Do we have anybody with a question on tonight? Yes, I have a hand raised. Ryan Allard.
Derek Chung here. Hello?
Mr. Chong, you have to wait until I acknowledge you are your number 2 on my list. I'm taking Mr. Ryan Allard now, and you would be next.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that, Mr. Chong. Good day, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to see what's happening. This is an exciting time for all of us, but I will be brief. I can't continue after this, unfortunately, for another meeting. So I really have 3 points, but I'll be very brief. I know I only have 1 question. What exactly is the top-level goal of this redevelopment of Scarborough? Because I'm seeing a lot of ideas thrown around, and these are great ideas, but is the goal, I know clearly we have specific problems you want to fix in Scarborough, right? So maybe a goal could be to ensure that there's connectivity across people. So I think people should always be the center of these discussions, right? So is that the goal? Is that one of the goals? So I'd like to see that laid out so that as we go into these specific actions that we're talking about, then we can be clear on how these tie back to our overarching goals. That's one. Just I have 2 points, suggestions. I think we should have some very clear approaches for how we're going to execute this plan. I see it in the chat, we've had a plan from Geneva some years ago. We do not know what has happened to that, especially people outside of the THA. Is this going to go the same way of that plan? So I think it's important to have some clear laid out strategies for how we're going to execute the plan, whatever it is in the end. And obviously that needs system change, not just building of projects, right? So we're talking about if we're having, let's say, renewable energy or something, clearly it needs to be something that is repaired, it's fixed on a schedule, people know how to use it, people change their behavior, etc. So I think that has to be part of the plan too, not just a physical. The final point before I go is, I think it's important for us to also have examples from places that have similar climates to us. So I've seen some of the images suggest that they come from northern climates, from the US, Europe, etc. And some of those don't work for us, very well. For instance, cycling without covering. I mean, we don't really have a cycle culture here. So I think some of those examples could come from places like Singapore, which have similar climates. But I'll end there. Thank you very much. And I'm excited about this process. Thank you.
Dr. Allard, we thank you for your comments, and I know I see Mr. Stewart and the team are quickly writing, so they are noting your comments. Mr. Chong, I have been waiting for you. Let's hear your questions or your comments, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. I own and operate a dive center here in Tobago since 1987, and I'm also the Underwater Cultural Heritage Representative for the Tobago Museum Trust. The proposed expansion of the port facility to cater for cruise ships and so forth directly threatens the wrecks, especially the ones from the 1677 battle that lay in Scarborough Harbour. Now, as Trinidad and Tobago are signatories to the 2001 convention, UNESCO Convention on the safeguarding and preservation of underwater cultural heritage, and therefore we have a responsibility, an added responsibility in that regard. I just want to know whether or not the planners have kept that in mind and have made provision for any rescue archaeology that may be required in order to do the expansion without destroying the wrecks that are in Scarborough.
Panelists, do you wish to comment on Dr. Chong's question? I said Dr. Chong, Mr. Chong's question. He asked about if there was any consideration for the relics that are under the sea and the preservation of such in your plans to extract them, essentially.
Okay, I think that the preservation of those wrecks are very important, and that whatsoever can surface, there's a museum that is to be built to put in some of those relics, and others that might have to stay underwater, we'll ensure that they are protected, that they can be sought after when the time comes.
Thank you, Dr. Boris. We have a question from Facebook. What about the botanical gardens, a main tourist attraction? So I guess the person is saying they haven't heard anything about the botanical gardens in these conceptual plans, and they want to know if any consideration is given about the botanical gardens, which is currently a main tourist attraction.
Yes, there are plans to enhance and develop the botanical garden, sorry, to make it more friendly for visitors and tourists. We are planning to redesign the entrance and the whole experience and the trail throughout the gardens.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I have Karen Alexander. Ms. Alexander, do you have a question for us? Welcome. Karen Alexander, if you could unmute yourself, and we're waiting. Thank you.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I have one quick comment and a question. In terms of the comment, first of all, I'm very impressed with the plan. I'm a community tourism consultant. My comment is that I noticed that your recreation area with your trees and so on the boardwalk, I didn't notice any plans there for booths or any, you know, things like ice cream shops and that kind of thing. The things that people look for when they are recreating. So that was my comment. Plus, of course, I have to highlight the whole idea of public facilities, bins, signage, and so on, because very often we have cities and you can hardly find a dustbin. Now, my question is, have you all taken into consideration the soft infrastructure, such as the theming of the city, the marketing of the city, the networking of the business community? Oh, sorry, I just saw that you wanted me to see my video. Ongoing financial sustainability, activities and events, that the soft infrastructure that will support the city. Because I have noticed that in Tobago, you have the esplanade there. There is not as much use being made of the esplanade as there should be. And also, you have the in Port Spain, it's the same thing with the waterfront. The waterfront is, you know, very welcoming and all that, but people hardly make use of the waterfront for recreational purposes. So I was just wondering whether you all have considered the soft infrastructure, the networking of the business community and the marketing of the city, the theming of the city, the ongoing financial sustainability, the activities and events and so on. Thank you.
Ms. Karen, thank you very much for your question. I am with you. I am hoping that they have some ice cream shops there for me and everybody else that loves ice cream. But I am going to hand your question over about consideration for soft infrastructure, which is important and sometimes neglected after we have our plans developed and in place, to our panel to give just a brief comment on that before we go on to our question from Facebook.
Yes, I think Alvin presented some images where there will be shops, ice cream shops along the pedestrianized areas, obviously to capture all the visitors traversing throughout that area. And in-depth market research will be done to justify or to inform the master plan moving forward.
Thanks, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Williams from Speyside, we are so excited to have you on. Welcome, sir.
Yes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Right. I'm very elated to be a part of this course, although I'm very late. I just have suggestion to say. I love the question about the botanical gardens, and I just want to suggest that it's very important to use what we already have in terms of bringing to the fore the importance of green spaces. I mean, the world is very much shifting to appreciating green spaces. They have many therapeutic and even functional values between people in terms of people and how they relate to greenery, right? Studies have already shown that there's a very strong correlation between having green spaces and productivity, actually. So the premise on which the question was actually botanical gardens, I just wanted to suggest that we have many concepts around the world, and examples we could pull from being at city with this Scarborough or city to make that one of our mecca for tourist attractions. And everything does not necessarily have to come from central government or those various loan institutions to which might be able to fund this project on a whole. So I just wanted to suggest that perhaps partnering with the Division of Education, Division of Agriculture, and other agricultural organizations, whether it be global, regional, and locally, to tap into things like the Green Fund. Perhaps you might want to partner with Eric and all these other institutions to help, be a part of the environmental / agricultural aspect of it and tie it right into tourism and making our capital a more better attraction. Because I looked at some concepts around the world, like New York. I think New York have a very lovely oasis that takes you away from the business of New York into a whole garden in the center of the city with waterfall to act as a noise buffer to take you away. And I think we could do something like that for Scarborough. I mean, let us do better than our sister Trinidad. That's just my contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. We continue to encourage you to call in to post your questions via Facebook or YouTube, and we ask you to call in, not just to ask questions. If you have a suggestion, if you have a concern, we're gathering information here, so don't just think you have to call only if you have a question. If you have a solution to something that you've seen that we could do better, please call and share your information with us. We have a question from Facebook from Dr. James Armstrong, who is an urban and regional planner. What is proposed for the fort in order to make a cable car economical? Again, that question is, what is proposed for the fort in order to make a cable car economical?
Well, we are still doing in-depth research in order to justify the best locations for the different stations to accommodate the cable cars. At this stage, we are just in the conceptual stage. Moving forward, the engineers will determine what are the best locations for the infrastructure to implement the cable cars. It's just an idea we throw out to the public to get their feedback.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. So Dr. James, it's not cast in stone as yet. The idea is there, and as the plans work along, the ideal locations and all of those things would be worked into the plan by the experts. We have M. Dillon on Zoom. M. Dillon, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure if this question was probably answered last week because I wasn't part of that session and I joined late, but I just want to advocate for persons with disability. I'm currently concerned about how Scarborough is in terms of accessibility for persons with disability, and I'm not sure in terms of the planners, if they have considered that in any real way. And I'm also suggesting that it may be useful to have a consultation with persons from that group in terms of making this thing really meaningful going forward.
Thank you for your question and concern. I know earlier in the presentation, because you said you came on late, that comments were made on accessibility and making Scarborough more user-friendly because of the same concerns that you would have raised. And I know for certain that as the process goes along, that more consultations will happen with more targeted groups so that they can gather that specific type of data that you have suggested. So we are on the right track with that one. Richard J. Richard J. on Zoom.
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Yes,
I'm here.
Welcome.
Are you hearing me?
I am.
Hello?
I am hearing
Hello, are
you.
you? Okay, yes, all right. All right, good afternoon, folks. Once again, I'm just going to highlight quickly some of the things as a financial banking expert, as well as dealing with lighting. One of some of the things I'm hoping that the panel, the established panel, would consider. Last week, I think Dr. Thomas and Dr. Boris spoke about the greater Scarborough area and the possibility of density, because one of the things in terms of financing this particular project, I know there are two aspects of it. Getting money from equity from the central government, but there may be constraints. So some of the things I just wanted to highlight was, first with the port, I wonder if the panel would also look into, because of the small confined space of Scarborough, I think Dr. Allison last week presented an alternative consideration that the tourism and the local and the international hubs for tourism should be in Scarborough itself, but the cargo port, which would have connectivity to the airport, would also be a consideration. That's number one. Number two is the issue of density, increasing the population in Scarborough. I think that is a consideration. I know you have 290 houses planned, but in terms of raising revenue, because even if you get equity injection from the government, any new town would have to have ongoing revenue. So I know there's an Esplanade plan, but I'm hoping that consideration will also be given to possibly look at air rights, where you can expand the population. There is a huge interest for people who would, not only tourists, but the people in the diaspora who would actually have a townhouse or a condo or something of that effect. So I'm hoping that the established panel, esteemed panel, will look at that. Also, with that, I'm looking at the issue of raising revenue. That issue of raising revenue between the debt and the equity, there's something called an optimal capital structure for any project, and that will give the possibility of this project being funded if there is not enough equity coming from the central government. Two other things that I would just like to ask about. I heard about the green project where for water and for lights, which is very good. I wonder if the issue of water sewage, because I don't know, Tobago does not always have a central sewage system. So all of these things have to be more or less tied in, and I don't know if somebody in the panel could discuss about that. And then the last point, there was one last point I had. Is there any consideration, which is all tied into the cost? What was if the panel was actually looking, if the lead architect and the urban planners were looking at the cost of what these phases might actually be over, let's say 5, 10, 15 years. So those are my considerations or suggestions, and my two specific questions, as I said, was the cost as well as the sewage issue tied into the green urban planning that the panel has. That would be my contribution.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Before we answer those questions, though, I have Mr. Kerr on the line. Mr. Kerr, I'll take your question and then we'll answer all the questions that we've had.
All right, no problem. Good evening to the panel, as well as to the listening and viewing public. Well, I am Kidel Kerr. I am an environmentalist, and also I have studied landscaping. However, based on the designs and based on the architectural drawings, I am seeing that a new town is being proposed based on land reclamation, right? And a common associated issue is that land reclamation deals with the importation of soil, importation of sand, and so forth as infilling materials. Now, I know in the THE and in government especially, throughout Trinidad and Tobago, what we have experienced is a lack of maintenance. And if we are creating this town based on land reclamation, it means that we must have more or less like a maintenance plan in place. Because, you know, we are located along that Atlantic Ocean, where we normally have rough seas, currents, swells from time to time. And therefore our coastal area, our coastal zone will experience some debilitating and detrimental effects over time. The question is there a mitigation plan that would cater for coastal erosion, not only within that area that is being developed, but also within neighboring areas? For example, Lambo, that area down at Magdalena, on the west, and maybe on the eastern side. I'm not too sure if that water may be backed up until even Studley Park. So I'm not too sure if the architects and the designers, if they have taken into consideration that coastal zone aspect of the project. All right. In addition to my comment, I also would like the designers to also consider landscape designers, not only landscape architects, but landscape designers to also be a part of that botanical rehabilitation project also. Because I find too often we focus too much on the hardscape construction, and then we don't focus on the softscape aspect of things. All right, so as part of the rehabilitation of the botanical garden, I would like those in authority to consider landscape designers and maybe agronomists and these people to be a part of that process, the planning and implementation aspect of it. So basically, that is all I have to contribute at this moment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kerr, for your contributions. And so we'd answer those questions from before. A Zoom caller asked about sewage considerations and about the costing of the project over time, while Mr. Kerr's comments had to do with the mitigation plan for coastal erosion.
Okay, I would answer some of the questions or some of the concerns. At least I want to put on the table that this plan is very fluid at this point in time. We are feeling, that's the reason why we are feeling these information from the public, so that we can do what is required and necessary for the proper development of Scarborough. Now, I looked at the sewage system. We have a sewage plant in Scarborough. It's in the Smithfield area, but the connectivity among all the buildings in Scarborough at this juncture has not been completed. So that's part of the plan to ensure that all Scarborough is being connected to the sewage system, and there are also plans to have taken some of the sewage down to the area down at it's not Susulands, the Mount Pleasant development down at Kidam Bonaccord area. But those are things that we really have to put on board, and actually you're developing a city, and we have to ensure that the water systems, the sewage systems, all the utilities are there in place to ensure a comfortable life in the city. Now, the coastal assessment for erosion, those have to be taken into consideration, because when you do a development in an area, that is a global part of the assessment. And we have to make sure that whatsoever sediment may be developed in the turning basin must be dredged and kept that basin at a particular depth. The coastal erosion along the coast must also be taken into consideration and dealt with in a particular way. So all those would be on the drawing board for assessment and to be put in place before they can create significant problems along the coast. The area with respect to someone had mentioned the interface of the divisions to ensure that we have a better mix and information coming out of the THA system itself. I just want to indicate, in the time when we were doing the development of Scarborough, or the Scarborough Enhancement Program, most of the divisions, there was a committee that involved most of the divisions, the health particular division, the agricultural division, because if you have seen on the waterfront now, there are some grape plants growing there. There were no grape plants. We had agriculture to create a nursery that we could be able to restore the grape trees along the area. And you can look there now. You are seeing that they have grown and becoming much more mature grape plants. So there's always an interface between the divisions of the assembly to ensure the progress and a well organized arrangement for the development of Scarborough. That will also be reactivated in any way to ensure that there's a smooth flow, a smooth mix between both the division of infrastructure, quarries and urban development, division of agriculture, division of health, division of tourism. There will be a constant mix of ideas and thoughts so we can enhance the product to a very high degree. So far, and at least the soft, I remember this one person speaking about this soft infrastructure where you can get shops and bins and signage and benches. All those will come into play. As when the hard infrastructures are completed, the soft infrastructure will be added to enhance the finesse of the feeling of Scarborough when you are there. That is part of the town planners and the architects program to bring that soft touch to Scarborough to make it a city that you could feel the beat and enjoy whatsoever you see and things of that nature.
Thank
So
you.
Thank you
very much, Dr. Boris. We have a few more questions from Facebook. We need information on the phasing of the development. How are we going to do it? That's from Lily Danielle. And I have a next question. Was the drainage situation in Scarborough addressed already? Bertram Hatsam. But before we answer those two questions, I have Mr. Lloyd Scotland on. Mr. Scotland, welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My question is, can I go ahead?
Yes, you can.
My question is, what are we going to do with the annual sargassum seaweed that comes into the harbor annually? That I know from time to time our interferes give trouble in terms of the seaweed taken into the propellers of these vessels. What are we going to do with the sargassum seaweed? Are we going to make a brace wall or something like that to take it out? What are we going to do?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Scotland, for that question. So I'll go back now to the panel just to answer those questions quickly because I have a lot of questions and comments coming in. So we'll go back to the panel to answer those questions.
So just to answer the phasing question, The next stage after this public consultation will be all the feasibility studies and coastal studies, after which we will determine what element of the project can be done, while the other aspects of the research is being done. So areas like the civic center, the transport hub, those areas which are inland can go ahead once we collect all the necessary data in terms of the traffic flow in Scarborough and all the data from PTSC. Once those are ascertained, then we can proceed to develop those aspects of the Scarborough development plan. The port, on the other hand, will take some time. We have to do in-depth research, all the coastal studies, all the feasibility studies and economic studies and market research must be done before we finalize the port design.
If I may add,
Yes.
in terms of the phasing, once we finalize the design must be finalized before we can decide how we are going to implement the plans. So we are still at the conceptual state, a very early stage in the planning process. But once we have finalized what our Scarborough would look like, then we can then flesh out how we are going to implement the different elements for Scarborough.
I know the last caller asked about sargassum, seaweed.
All right, before I go there with the seaweed, someone asked about the drainage of Scarborough. That is a very important issue that we want to make sure that Scarborough doesn't flood again at any time. The challenge is on the Cooks River, the cylinders there's a center support, and to remove that support is it's not a challenge. You can remove it, but it will cost. And we're trying to keep costs at a very low level. Now, in the Scarborough district area, there are river control teams that go up this river and ensure that logs and all branches are cut to prevent them clogging up that bridge. So I've already indicated the Secretary in this dry season that all those river control elements should be put in place to ensure that Scarborough doesn't flood at any time again. So that is in the making. We are ensuring that the river control teams go up the rivers, or the river in particular may have 2 branches, and ensure that all those logs and branches that could create a clog on that bridge to be removed. The other issue that I want to raise, because in the discussions last time, which the Secretary is aware, and it was raised, I raised it with him, which was a good point that Dr. Williams brought on board, that the Scarborough area, which is, we know the central Scarborough here is a little bit small, and we want to ensure that we capture circumstances where we can have economic growth and development. So at least I pitch on board from what was said, that the development of the Scarborough hub, instead of thinking of Scarborough town alone, it can incorporate probably from Mount St. George or Stanley Park, which is a development which has the industrial operation with respect to aggregates, and go straight down to the airport area, taking in mind the Cano Bay area, which is the industrial development belt, and the other parts that you can build storage warehouses for various circumstances. You can improve transshipment from land to sea to air, as the case may be. So all those things, we are taking on board all the good ideas that we can able to make the entire operation one that is progressive and successful. The other issue that was raised is about the seaweed. Those seaweed have been dealt with significantly by the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, and Urban Development. We want to make sure that continues, and the challenges that are facing us with the seaweed that we are concentrating how we can deal with it in a more holistic way, because on the beaches in down at the Magdalena, it has created a lot of problem down there, and other areas in Tobago. So we are taking on board the removal of those seaweed. When they come ashore, immediately remove them because they give off a very foul scent, and put them in a place where we can make compost to have the farmers use them as part of their fertilizing bank for the plants and green spaces on the island. So we want to do a more comprehensive management of that, and that is presently on the drawing board being dealt with.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boris. We're going to move swiftly back to our Zoom participants, and I urge you again to be brief, be concise, and make your point. Jesse Robinson, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Good
Can
evening.
you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Hi, okay, so my name is Jesse Robinson. I'm also an urban planner. And my question is really geared towards the site development standards. Currently, the current site development standards employed by the Town and Country Division, it would not accommodate a development of this magnitude. So my question is, has there been any consultation with the division for an improvement of these standards, specifically as it relates to the height and the development intensity? Also, is there any, if Scarborough is not already a special use area, has there been any consideration for this area as a special use district?
Thank you, Ms. Robinson, for your question. Panel, I'll take one more question from Zoom and then we'll answer that. Bashini Charles, good evening. Mr. Charles?
Good afternoon.
Good evening.
Are you hearing me?
I am.
Yeah. Okay, so I was wondering in regards to, they asked about the cost of the project. So I was wondering the cost, and if to fast track the project as a mega project, the government is thinking about selling bonds. A person, it could be like an investment to fast track the project as to buy another mega project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charles, for your question. Panel?
Concerning the Town and Country issue, the Secretary is currently liaising with Town and Country to revise some of the planning policies for Scarborough in order to develop the Scarborough Master Plan.
Okay. Okay, we have a Facebook question. Given the scope and impact of the airport redevelopment, how does the project factor into this redevelopment for Scarborough? So how does that project factor into this redevelopment for Scarborough? So we had Mr. Charles asking about the magnitude of the project and funding. And now we have this Facebook question asking about a comparison with the airport redevelopment and how does that project factor into this proposed project?
Those two developments will have to be considered and see how well they dovetail into each other to ensure the economy is boosted by both projects. The Scarborough project, which is the more the port and development of Scarborough as a whole, and the airport project. They also if they are married to each other, we can see a greater impact on the whole economy of Tobago, whether tourism and other industrial development. We can have all those mixed together in a particular way so we could get a hybrid out of the two projects.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burris. Nigel on Zoom, good evening. Nigel? Good evening, Nigel.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yes,
Hello.
I'm hearing you.
Yes, you're hearing me?
I am.
Excellent.
Good evening.
Good evening to the panel and to all persons who are listening in. We are from Island Living and Destination Management Services and Quality Assurance Company. What we want to know is tourism seems to be a very big part of this whole project. Is it that we have done research to find out what the client, the tourist client, is looking for as we plan out this project? And are we targeting a particular type of client or types of clients so that we can plan with them in mind? That's the question.
Thank you, Nigel, for your question. Yes, we got your question. Thank you very much. Kenneth Lewis, are you with us? Before I take you, Mr. Lewis, I see our panelist, Mr. Thompson, is trying to make a comment. Mr. Thompson?
Yes, so I wanted to speak a bit about the point that the previous caller made about the entire Southwest area. You recall, I introduced this idea of a Greater Scarborough region last week on our last consultation. And I did say in response to Mr. Stewart, Alan Stewart, that you really have to think about the development of Scarborough within the context of a big region that stretches from Bacolet over to Plymouth and what I call the Southwest Peninsula. If you think about Scarborough's development in that context, then you realize that a lot of the issues that are raised by the people who are contributing to this consultation make a lot of sense. You can't think about Scarborough. Scarborough has 1,000 people. You cannot think about the development of Scarborough, all right, as the development of a city center. Scarborough is a subset of a larger development piece. In the same way, you have to think about Northeast Tobago. So when you think about development in Tobago, in my humble view, and the people who are contributing this evening are quite right. You have to think about developing Northeast Tobago and developing Southwest Tobago. If you start thinking like that, then all the issues with the airport and the tourism issue that the caller just raised, those become folded into a Southwest Tobago development plan. All right, so the people who are calling in and responding are quite right. Scarborough is but a subset of the bigger development piece, which is the Southwest Tobago development area.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thompson, for that contribution. Kenneth Lewis, are you still with us? Kenneth Lewis, good evening.
Hello?
Yes, good evening.
Hello?
Good evening, we're hearing you.
Hello?
Mr. Lewis, we're hearing you. I seem to be having a connectivity issue with Mr. Lewis, so I'll put Mr. Lewis on hold and go on to Brandon Gray. Mr. Lewis will come right back to you. Brandon
Hello?
Gray.
Hello, Kenneth Lewis.
Mr. Lewis, are you hearing us now?
Yes, I am, yeah.
You can go ahead.
Are you
Good
hearing me?
evening. Yes, go ahead. We're hearing
Thank you very much. Good evening. Good evening to everyone. I attended a session last week, Wednesday, and someone briefly touched on the port and the artifacts that are underground, under the water. Mr. Chung, earlier this evening, he raised the point again about what is requesting or asking for information as to what is being proposed with respect to all those artifacts that are down there. And in my opinion, that the response that was given was really lacking, and possibly a thorough investigation has not taken place with respect to what is to be done with that. I would like to suggest that artifacts could be a major money earner, foreign exchange earner for this country. All right? I'll give you an example as to how critical that is and how important it is. In Peru, you have the Inca ruins, Machu Picchu. On average, in the season, 4,000 visitors per day visit that site. Now just figure you charging, I don't know what the numbers would be in terms of US dollars, to take in a museum here that would have on display the artifacts from the port. And you could see it's going to be a really big money earner. And if you develop the entire set of antiquities around Tobago, you know, all sorts of things could be developed around that, tours and all sorts of things. And I would like to ask one question, whether any in-depth feasibility has been done to determine the cost of extracting those pieces of artifacts, properly curing them to ensure that their life is, you know, lengthy, and then of course them fitting into numbers like the feasibility. I would also like to say any work on that would take place before, or ought to take place before, the port development per se. And therefore, if you are thinking about phase things and you decided that you won't develop the port, as I say, I think you have to deal with those artifacts on the ground. And therefore, you could start with doing that, dealing with that, getting that out of the way, and then bringing on the actual port development. So I want to suggest that a thorough analysis, feasibility be done with respect to that underwater gold mine that we have there, all right, very early, and get that out of the way, and then you can get on with the port work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis, for your contribution. I'll take
contribution in that it was said that a museum will be built to house these artifacts, and those that you cannot pull up from the seabed, only the divers and people who may be interested in going down there to see it. There may be some kind of probably a tourism arrangement to get them down into the seabed to view those artifacts. But I agree with him that there should be whatsoever is need to be retrieved from the seabed. There was a project already on stream retrieving some of those artifacts from the seabed. That was ongoing. I think I can't remember. I know Miss Levy's guy was part of that project. Dr. Levy's guy was part of that project, and that was ongoing. But we need probably more input to deal with this situation. And I think it's a good idea, and it would probably create an attraction for more tourists to come into the country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boris. Brandon Gray. Mr. Gray, good evening.
Yes, good afternoon, or good evening. I must say that most of the persons who spoke before took away some of the things that I meant to say. But I want to add that I'm very excited about this issue. Highly, as a Tobagonian who grew up in Scarborough, from all the days of the cooperative, where it was and all that sort of thing, and seeing where we are thinking of going, I am excited about this project. I think it's not for me because it's not what I may not see the benefit of it, but it's for the benefit of those young people, my grandchildren, who will see a different Scarborough, and I'm proud of that. I also would like to say I admire what Mr. Thompson has said. I think we need to take into consideration not Scarborough, but how does that fit into the whole project, the whole development project for Tobago? How does that fit in terms of bringing the whole island into the developmental stage that it ought to be? Over time, I'm sure. I also recall having lived in the Bahamas, for instance. I lived there for quite some time. And you have 5 ships coming into the port on most occasions, and each ship would bring in close to 3,000 persons per day. What does that mean? If we say 35% of the persons come offshore, spending $20 per person, let's say, I'm sure we have an economist, astute economist in the panel, he can bring those things to bear on the program. What does that mean? What does that mean for development? And how are we developing the island to assume all these persons, for instance, where they go, what they should see? Because when I go on a cruise, they want to take me to a tree and tell me this tree was 50 years old, 120 years old, as the case might be. So what Dr. Thompson is speaking about is ideal. We must see how the Scarborough port fits into the whole development and how it will attract the persons who visit us and how they would want, when people come to visit, of the ships, mainly of the ships, they intend to come back. If we show them a good time, they will return. And they will return for longer stay rather than on ships. That's one. I also feel the waste management issue is something that we need to consider. I leave it for there now because as a resident in Scarborough, living in Scarborough, I decided to participate and give my comments on this exciting program, this exciting development. I see it as that, and I'm happy that we are undertaking this. I also would like to add, though, we call and we talk about the government must give. I remember hearing Mr. Hotel Charles make a statement not too long ago about Tobago, what it has, what it owns. That's a negotiation that we need to start to have in terms of what it is that we can get and what is deposited here. I'm not saying we want to all negotiate in terms of how we fund the development of Tobago, as Dr. Alvin Thompson has mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. We go now to Facebook for another question from Facebook. What plans do you have to mitigate traffic congestion in Scarborough, especially with the expansion of the port?
As mentioned earlier, that area, Sansasil, Smithfield area, will be, the road networks in that area will be revised in order to help with the traffic flow in and out of Scarborough.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We will have to do a review of all the existing traffic management plans, and then we can decide on the best way forward to mitigate the traffic. There are several plans. I know the Geneva Master Plan had some suggestion on how we can alleviate the traffic. So we'll review all the plans. We'll also do, if needs be, additional traffic management study, and then we would implement based on the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Duke. I have Mr. Baird, I think, on Zoom. Mr. Baird, good evening.
Yes, good evening. Are you hearing me?
I am hearing you, sir.
Fine. I basically decided that I would send my concerns in writing. But it is clear, and I agree with Alvin and others, we need to redefine the boundaries of Scarborough, because as a little fellow, Scarborough was as far as the Backlet Cemetery, as far as the 4th Street at the Y in the road going to the hospital, as far as Gomes in the west, and as far as the Crooks River. That's what I grew up in the town of Scarborough with. I definitely agree we have to redefine Scarborough, and just out of a quick response, maybe using what I call the Scarborough, the Tongues Escarpment, running from Lambo through Government House Road into Old Fort and down to the Backlet, Greater Backlet Bay. So that's what I would be looking at. And the reason I say that is simple. Scarborough is just a part of the island of Tobago, which has a very rich tapestry in its history. And if we were to take it and stretch it in the Crown Point, we would be rubbishing quite a number of cultural and social and areas if we just stretch it out to Southwest. So I am going to highlight it greater. Secondly, the whole question of Scarborough and its redevelopment went back to my tenure as Secretary for Tourism back in 1997, when we did have a plan that we put together, not as elaborate as this one, but one which would have seen some improvement into what happens in town today. I am suggesting that the handbook and the maps that were done, they need to be reviewed, all right? Geologically, Western Scarborough is a nightmare since in the 1960s geologically. What I want to suggest is that we need, if nothing else now, to look at a time frame or timetable towards starting this project. This project must happen, agreed. But we need to put a time frame or a framework together. What are the low-hanging fruit and how do we go about? Vending in the streets of Scarborough now, that's ridiculous. Men running between cars at intersections to sell water, totally unacceptable. Vendor laybys, yes, and vendor laybys go back into my era as Secretary for Tourism. And how are we preparing our people here in Tobago to reap the benefits of a refurbished Scarborough? Their skills, their artisan skills, etc. There are areas in the town. That area where Castry Street comes down to the fish port, we knew that as Skinner's Dockyard. And we have a port gate coming out there. And I've always said, let's not mix the tourists in on Milford Road. Let them come through that northern port gate, and we can set up somewhat of a craft market there away from the humdrum of Milford Road with taxis and whatnot. But I am going to put my views in writing, and I will submit them to the committee. It's a good project. It's one that needs to be done, but we have to be careful. It cannot be rushed. It needs to be phased. First phase, second phase, etc. Let us do it right, because in my books, at my age, we here in Tobago only have one opportunity to correct the ills of over 60 to 70 years, or if you want, 130 years from annexation. All right, so I will hush at this point, and I do hope that my views are given consideration. And let me just say this last, it is time we meet and go on tour of some of these areas that we are identifying for redevelopment. Have a pleasant evening all. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Baird, and we thank you again for your contribution. And I know that the division will look forward to that document that you would send forth so that we can examine it and incorporate it in the redevelopment plans. I have one more question from Facebook. What is the timeline for going green, particularly as it pertains to construction or reconstruction by state agencies? So I know the panel is probably thinking, how does this question kind of directly link back into the design? But I know earlier Mr. Stewart would have spoken something about the designs going green, and I guess that the question...
we are glad that this question is asked. We'll at least incorporate it into the analysis that we are going to do. At least it's a very sensible and very sensitive question, and it needs to be considered. So we want to thank the contributor of the question. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. We'll just... Are there areas that would facilitate musical and cultural performances?
Yes, there will be areas in the development. The existing port terminal will be repurposed for those activities.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I will ask Mr. Dr. Thompson just to give us a contribution at this time.
Madam Chair, I feel as though my entire presentation was lost on my panel. My entire presentation revolved around a green strategy for this development. All right? I have listened to the contributions of all the people that have called in, and what they are pointing to are issues having to do with sustainability, all right, and serenity, and clean energy. And that is why what I thought I did in my presentation, to say that when you are thinking about a project with so many moving parts, you have to think about the project within a broader development philosophy. And my suggestion was that philosophy should be a green philosophy. So the people who are talking about sewage, they are talking about environmental health issue, clean water, all right? So all those things can be encapsulated within a green strategy, my first slide. So, but I'm thinking of perhaps that was lost on my panel.
Well, Dr. Thompson, I don't think it was totally lost because you're still here, and so we thank you for reminding us that that was a part of your contribution. I think the questions may have been so many that it kind of got a little bit pushed back a little bit. I have David Maraj on Zoom. Mr. Maraj, good afternoon, good evening.
Good afternoon. Yes, sir. And congratulations to everybody involved for hosting these public forums so people can share your opinions and views. I have just one simple question. Who in the marine sector was consulted regarding design and layout for this project, regarding the placement of the piers and the feasibility of berthing ships in the way through that?
He wanted to know who was consulted, marine personnel. I didn't hear exactly, but marine personnel that was consulted when you looked at the design for...
Well, at least I said in the last session, probably he was not there, but the birthing of those ships are just a picture of what we hope will happen in the final analysis. But when the engineers and the modelers come in to deal with the circumstances with the waves and current and all that, there may be a different orientation of the vessels. So all these things are fluid. At least we're trying to convey the concept and the ideas of what we would like to see. And when the engineering and the oceanographers or coastal persons come on board, we do the physical modeling and to do the analysis, the numerical analysis of the area. The location and berthing areas may be in different directions, right? It might not be 100, 160, 80 degrees, but it may move maybe 20 or till 50 degrees movement. So it is not me to decide that now. It has to be reality. It has to be tested and proven that that is what is required to put that berthing in a particular way to ensure the best operation in the port.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boris. I have another similar question from Facebook. So I don't know if you'll add anything to this, but just to put it out there, was any consideration given to the marine life in that area? If by chance it is unique to that area, how do they intend to deal with that? So I know your last comment there would have kind of wrapped that up in a nutshell, but just to get that information out there that persons are thinking about these things when we're doing the plans.
These are, if they're unique habitats to that area that are meaningful to our development, then it will be taken on board. But the studies, we are only in the initial stage of doing this project, and we are taking on board all the inputs, and that is one that is we looked at. So thank Ms. Jean Blackman for that input. Thanks.
We're moving swiftly along, and we're taking PJ from Zoom. Good evening, PJ.
Good evening. Thank you so much for acknowledging me. I have two questions. I'll just state them quickly. The first being, I am having a little difficulty wrapping my mind around the context that this redevelopment plan is being framed in. If the CDEP and the CDEP 2.0 are considered outdated, what about the NSDS that would have been developed most recently at the national level? What exactly is the general framework for this plan? That is the first question. Secondly, to clarify the previous question I posted on Facebook about going green, as Dr. Thompson rightly identified. Maybe he's the best person to answer the question then. What is the process for that happening? Because being LEED certified is not an easy feat. And perhaps that it makes more sense asking it the question this way, so it ties in with the airport project that I asked about earlier. The airport project is supposed to be going after LEED certification. So if you're proposing projects in Scarborough that are also going after LEED certification, there should be a coordination of that effort. Okay? If that is still in a conceptual stage, I'm not sure that it's possible for the two projects to have that kind of relationship, but it should happen. One shouldn't be happening without the other. The magnitude and impact of both of those projects for the entire island should happen concurrently, even if only at the conceptual stage. So that was basically the point I was trying to get at when I raised those questions around the airport and around going green. What is the thought process behind that actually happening? Because our contractors and professionals tend to operate in a way that is typically not green or up to sustainable standards. So what is the process? What's the idea behind getting practitioners, technicians, technocrats, and decision makers to understand the need for these things? Thank you.
PJ, I'm glad that you chose to ask your question in person, because now it gives a little bit more context to the question, and I'm sure that the panel now understands your question a little bit differently from when we read it. I am going to ask the panel now to answer your question if they have another answer. I know Dr. Thompson, you referenced him in one of your questions.
I'm glad that the issue has been raised by the, the contributor. And it is a pertinent issue. But I want to stay out of preference my contribution by saying that is why we have consultations. Perhaps we would not have been thinking about this. I raised the issue of lead certification. And remember when I responded to the last question, I did say, all right, that if you are doing a project of this magnitude, you have to have a design philosophy and you have to have a broader strategy. And I thought in my presentation, that is what I tried to do. The caller made mention of CDP, the Comprehensive Economic Development Plan. Well, the concept of clean, green, safe, and serene came out of the Comprehensive Economic Development Plan. All I did was to change it around to put green at the top, because I recognize that green really is the overarching principle for sustainable development. So you take a green strategy and you mainstream all these sub-areas of a development plan into that strategy, because green essentially is a synonym for sustainable development. And in my second slide, when I went to clean, I spoke about net zero and carbon neutrality. That is about reducing our carbon footprint. So my entire presentation, and I'm kind of sorry that it has been lost on many people, had to do exactly with what the caller is talking about. You have to have this bigger strategy. So everything that has been said this evening by all the contributors, I have already fitted in one of those boxes. It's either green, it's either clean, it's either safe or serene. So if I were given the task to look at all the contributions this evening, I would fit every one of those contributions within those sub-areas, because all of them, to my mind, points to this idea of an overarching development or green strategy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thompson, for your contribution there and for bringing to the forefront those ideas that you would have discussed in your presentation. Has an area been proposed for a park?
Yes, in where the Light and Life Secondary School is currently located. So there's a park being proposed in that area, going all the way down to the port area. So yes, a park was considered in our proposal.
Okay, I have Dalton on Zoom. Dalton, good evening. Dalton, good evening.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good evening.
Yes, what I wanted to, I came in a bit late, right? But a concern that I have, I heard Mr. Alvin refer to his concept of fitting all the boxes of green, clean, safe, serene, and urban. Now, I want to be a little more knowledgeable on the presentation. Is this being recorded to the fact that it will be available to the public after, so that it could be reviewed on that level? What are we doing it?
Say that part of the last part. Is it being recorded for, is what being recorded, the consultations?
Yes, is the consultation being recorded, right? To the point that people who would have came in late, or people who would have developed a concern after this presentation has been done, that it could be discussed, reviewed, or that kind of thing, outside of
Definitely, Dalton.
conversation we're having here.
Yes, and you can always access it on YouTube. It's been streamed on YouTube and it will be saved there, so the public can have access once we're done, and it will be saved on our DIQUD Facebook page and our Scarborough Urban Redevelopment Facebook pages. So yes, it is being recorded, and yes, the public will always have access to it.
That's all. Lovely. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We encourage you to still send your questions if you have any. We have one more question from Facebook. Is it possible to do an undersea video of the area to be touched by the proposed port expansion so that people can know what exists now and what is at stake in developing the area? Is it possible to do an undersea video of the area to be touched by the proposed port expansion so that people can know what exists now and what is at stake in the developing area?
I think the technology could afford that, yes. I don't know what the cost would be, but it could be done.
It can be done. Well, the saying goes, all things are possible, only believe. So I believe that it can be done. So I agree with you, Doc. I agree with you. I'm just checking to make sure that I've covered all your questions, because the purpose of the consultations are to hear from you. So I'm just checking in with our technical team just to verify that we have all the questions, and we'll take this question from Zoom. Brendan Gray, you are back. Welcome back.
Yes. Good day again. Sorry about that. But I would like to also add, having brought in the situation where I live in the Bahamas, for instance, are we considering going to those areas, St. Lucia, Antigua, and see what they did well? But they also did reclamation, and see what areas of challenges they had and how they overcome those challenges. So probably we need to go up the island and have that experience so that it could influence what we do and how we do what we do, along with all the issues that I raised earlier, in particular that Dr. Alvin Thompson has raised, and I keep raising that it must be a complete development program, a complete development plan for the island of the Bay, not only Scarborough. But as a Scarborough resident and someone who grew up in Scarborough, I'm very excited about this whole issue. Thank you.
Mr. Gray, you can rest assured that all your comments that you've made this evening and your questions have been heard. And we thank you, Tobago. We thank you very, very much for contributing and for being a part of this consultation this evening. We have the final consultation in this first series of consultations next Wednesday, that's March 9th at 5 p.m. through the same formats that we had this evening. So you can log in on Facebook, YouTube, or if you wish to get in on Zoom, we can send you that information. Just message us on Facebook, send us an email at the division, and we will be able to do so. So we thank you for joining in with us at this virtual public consultation for Scarborough Redevelopment. And until next week, we say to you, reimagine a new Scarborough. And we'll see you again on March 9th. Good evening.